Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, coming to you from the central part of the lovely state of California. And I'm the author of about 45 books, close to 30 novels, all told.
So just a couple of books, really. So, no big deal.
I like to say I've written 45 books.
Do you have Molly?
Two of them are good. So
there you go. But you have to read them all to figure out which two. See, that's a marketing scheme right there. You're smart. I like that. So we will have Molly Jo joining us. Just had a couple computer issues, so we're hoping that she'll be able to get logged back on. Reminder to those of you listening to us on delay or audio only, you can watch us live Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time via Google Hangouts. We do a live Google Hangouts. You can watch us there. If you want to know how to get involved with that, add firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com to your Google Circle, and then you'll get those notifications and you can join us. So another quick reminder, if you are watching us on YouTube, please be sure to click that like button. Helps us out quite a bit. And lastly, if you've got a question for us, an Ask the Author question, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us, firstsinfictionpodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook or on Twitter and send us information or questions rather that way. So there we go. Shall we jump into the Ask the Author, Pops?
I think so. Yep.
All right. This week's question comes from Jenny Snow. And she wants to know, or rather it's not necessarily a question, she says, describe the moment you went from, quote, trying the writing thing to being a professional writer, and what changed inward and outwardly. How did your outcomes change? And so for me, and we've answered a kind of a similar question to this before a few weeks ago, but basically my story is that I've always been a writer. I've always known I was going to be a writer, but I don't know that I ever really took myself seriously and considered writing as anything more than a hobby until I went to a writer's conference, Blue Ridge, Pops. You brought me along and took some great classes there. And I remember who it was. I want to say it was, oh man, I can see his face. I can't think of his name right now, but he was saying to think of yourself as a writer, to when you introduce yourself as a writer.
John Riddle?
And for, it wasn't. It was the Disney guy who has two first names. McNair something.
McNair Wilson,
Maybe
yes. McNair Wilson. Yeah, very creative guy.
There you go.
McNair Wilson.
Yeah, super good guy. And I think it was him who was saying that. And I think even Stephen James had said something else. And it seemed that quite a few people were kind of preaching that same message. And that's when I thought, okay, well, that's it. Then I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to think of myself as a writer, and I'm going to take myself seriously. And what changed for me is the fact that I stopped thinking of writing as a hobby, as something that I can do for fun, and started thinking this is something that I have to do. It's a job, and I started putting in the hours. Luckily, I have a very supportive family, so I was able to juggle things so that I wasn't sacrificing time with them. And that's what really changed. It changed my perception of myself, which I think also improved my writing, just thinking of myself as a writer, taking myself more seriously. It encouraged me to continue my education, go back to get my master's degree, where I learned a lot at Antioch University there. And it encouraged me to actively seek publication, even though publishing at the time was not in a very good shape, very good spot. But there I was, seeking publication, submitting, and getting involved in the publishing world, the editing world, the writing world, and really kind of putting my foot in the door, so to speak. And those are the biggest changes. The outcomes, obviously, now I've got a couple books under my belt. I've got a couple more coming out this year. I hope to be writing book after book after book, and that's what I love to do. And so that was the change. Rather than just writing on the weekends occasionally, now I write throughout the week and on the weekends occasionally, and produce some good work. So some good words on page. I produced a lot of bad work too. Let's just be fair, but the published stuff is always good. So that's nice. That's nice. Molly,
well,
you've
better that than
joined
have
us.
the bad stuff published. Yes, my computer finally let me on. It took a little beating up, but I got it to cooperate.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that. So,
Thanks.
yeah, we're glad to have you. So, Pops, when did you make that decision, and how did your outcomes change?
Well, there was really, it's a long process, and there were several steps to it. I began thinking about being a writer when I was a child, and remember writing stories just as a kid, but I really had no idea where to go with all of that, and I got interested in other things, architecture, and I did that for 10 years. So that's one of the things that stuck with me for a while, and then I got a little more serious, began writing a few things, small pieces for magazines, book reviews, that sort of thing, and then tried my hand at nonfiction books and didn't have much luck at that, and I set the whole thing aside for quite a while. Then wrote my first novel and set it aside for 5 years, which was a waste of 5 years. Unfortunately, rewrote that and got that published. And then around the time I was 50, I began to think, I want to do this full time. And something happens to you when you reach the age of 50. You start thinking, I don't know how much longer I'm going to have to try this. And my biggest fear is dying, with my last words being, I wish I had tried, and then you fill in the blank with that. That's my night terrors that I have with that. So I thought, well, I'm going to give this a shot, whether I go broke or whatever, but I've got enough to last for a while, and I have contracts, so I should be able to go a couple of years. And that's usually the guideline. People say don't jump to full-time writing until you have 2 years' worth of income saved. Well, I had contracts and stuff to do that, and I've been doing that ever since. My first book came out in 1996, so this is my 20th year as a book writer.
Nice.
But I did some stuff prior to that, and I just had to give it a go. So I made the jump, and some people think that might be kind of scary, and they'd be right. But I did it. I had to give it a try. So, as Teddy Roosevelt would have said, it's better to fail while daring greatly. He says a whole bunch more with that, but that's it. Yeah. So.
Is that Roosevelt's axiom number 22, or?
Yeah, Teddy Roosevelt's famous quote. Yeah, it's not the critic who counts, not the one who points out how the strong man stumbled or the doer of the deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust, sweat, and blood, who trials violently but errs and comes up short again and again. And he was a writer. Comes up short again and again. And whose place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. So, in his world, better to be defeated than not to have tried. So, I finally took that to heart.
And apparently, you memorized it by heart. It sounds like.
Well,
unless you've got some
notes, yeah.
That's impressive. So I memorize poems, but not speeches. So good for you. How about you, Molly?
I came in late, and my computer has done funny things. Refresh me what the question is.
the question about becoming a writer. Let's see. Jenny Snow says, describe the moment you went from trying the writing thing to being a professional writer. What changed inwardly and outwardly? Yeah.
There were two moments, and the first moment I can remember was in 2007. I just decided that I'm going to stop calling myself an aspiring writer. I took the word aspiring out of my vocabulary, so when I would talk to people, I would just say, I'm a writer. Because I was always working on stuff, so I was already a writer, but claiming it that way did something mentally, and it gave me a bigger confidence to present myself to others as a writer, and I think that helped a lot. In 2007, Stephen J. Cannell, who was very prolific in creating and producing TV shows in the 80s, turned to writing. He sold his studio, turned to writing. And I had, in 2007, contacted him by email thinking, I'm never going to hear from him. He actually used my question. Not only did he respond to me in email, but then he put it up on his website with a video query, and it's still the #1 watched video on his website. And he he dialogued with me directly. He called me Molly Joe, which was the first time anybody, quote, famous called me Molly Joe. And it was about how to establish a long-term writing career. And I just took that to heart and thought, wow, if he can respond to me, then what I had to say was important enough. And that kind of triggered it too. So that was, again, when I took the word aspiring out of my vocabulary. The second was a few years later when I just went ahead and self-published my cookbook, the Unemployment Cookbook, because it was something that my friends and my daughter's families were asking for these recipes, and I thought, well, I never thought that my first book would be a cookbook, but it was. And because of that, yes, I'm a writer. I've been published. And so those two things were catalysts to get me over my own idea of what a professional writer is. And now I'm just keep pushing forward to write as many books as Al. So you got some competition there, Pops.
I'm a little hurt because you said no one famous ever calls you Molly Joe, and I call you Molly Joe all the time.
No. I said he was the first famous person to call me Molly Joe.
That's all right. I've decided to be hurt, so there's nothing you can say to me.
Okay. Well, let's just rewind this tape a little bit and figure that one out. I'll buy you a coffee next week, okay?
We'll do the rest of the cast from underneath the bus. It's fine. It's good.
Yeah. So. Okay. Well, that's nothing new for us, right?
If you're hearing the echo, that's just our voices reverberating off the diesel engine or something. I don't know. So
moving on.
Well, we are talking about the changing world of publication tonight, and so I called in a special guest. I know a famous guy, who's published a lot of books and a lot of novels and nonfiction. His name is Alton Gansky, and so he joins us now from Fresno. A rare treat. Rarely do we get to see someone of such writing caliber in the public eye, but he's a bit of a hermit. But
he's an icon. Hey, I know him.
Shell. Do you? Has he ever called you Molly Joe?
He calls me Molly Joe.
Okay.
All the time.
What's strange is he calls me Molly Joe also, so I don't know what that's about. Well,
he likes me better.
Yes.
You know what this reminds me of? Thank you very much, Aaron. Have you seen the commercial with I don't know, it's for some alcoholic beverage, I can't remember. And they say we hired a very famous actor to pitch our product for us, but she couldn't make it, so we got this guy, and it's Sir Patrick Stewart. This guy.
That's nice.
So
now you're equating yourself with Sir Patrick Stewart.
No, just being dissed. Just being dissed in the intro.
Sir Patrick Stewart. See,
we do what we can.
Star Trek. Oh, I love Star Trek. Okay.
Right?
I've been playing Star Trek Timelines on my phone. It's a little app. It's worthwhile, Pops. You should
No more apps. No more games, no more apps.
It's worthwhile.
Stop.
You should get it. Okay, moving on.
No.
Today's episode was brought to you by Star Trek Timelines. Find it in the App Store. All right. The changing world of publication. Now, Pops, I wanted to do this kind of as a Q&A with you because you've been publishing a lot longer than I have. You've been published by a variety of different publishers, different genres. You just mentioned it's been 20 years since you published your first book. Hard to believe it's been that long. And most people I know describe your career as a prolific career, that you are able to churn out book after book, and that you're constantly putting words on pages. I think that's one of the highest compliments anybody can pay a writer, is to call them prolific, and the fact that they produce not only a good amount of work, but good work in that regard. And so I've got a couple questions here for you, Pops, and as we go through, we might kind of take some rabbit trails here to get to some deeper answers. But really, just what kind of changes have you seen in the industry since 1996? 20 years is a long time for any industry. And you've been actively involved in it. So what have you seen over the last 20 years that publishing has changed?
Well, a lot has changed. That's not unusual, though, especially in businesses. They change all the time. But when you're working in a business and have no control over the change, then it becomes a little more significant. And some of the changes have been very, very good. Some have been awful, and just have to be endured, I suppose. So like I said, my first book came out in 1996. So I was writing before that. And publishing was really very different then. You did everything the old way. You sent in a physical manuscript. You followed a particular form, which I still think you should do for manuscript format, but they can get rearranged so quickly and reformatted now because of computers that it doesn't really matter what you send in. You just want to prove that you're professional and you've done your homework. But everything has changed, especially, I would say, in the last 10 years, and it's been epic in many ways. One of the biggest changes has been in mergers. Publishing used to be a very big business with a lot of major publishers. Now there's only a handful of publishers, but what they've been doing is buying up their competition. Now, there's a couple of reasons why you want to do that. One, you convert your competition into a source of income for you, so you get rid of competition and you generate more cash flow, and they make them a portion or a subset of the larger business. So, but there's a sort of cannibalization that's going on with one company buying another company, and they used to speak of the Big 10 publishers, and it was the Big 7, then it was the Big 6, then it was the Big 5, and now I think most people say it's just the Big 3 that seem to publish everything, and they have a bunch of smaller houses in it, and that became difficult for writers to know what was going on. And then every time a publisher bought out your publisher, let's say, that changed things for you, and that means you were, in a sense, orphaned. Orphan's a term that's used in writing where you sell your book, you have an editor, that editor quits or is fired or something happens, and so your project gets shifted to somebody who has no vested interest in it. You get a different editor, they don't know what's going on, they don't know what was negotiated. All they know is that twice the amount of materials on their desk now, and you get really orphaned, and projects can just die with that. Well, and one house buys out another, that can happen to you. Or, and I've seen this happen a few times, some of the worst things that have happened, they just cancel contracts. Even if it's illegal. Even if they can't cancel it, they do it anyway, because what are you going to do? You can sue them, but then you have a reputation of somebody who sues publishers, so good luck getting another publisher with that. But then again, the positive side is some of the smaller houses that we may have been placed with get stuck under the umbrella of a larger publisher. So let me give you a couple examples of that. Because I write for the Christian market, when the Christian publishing line really took off, the general market line got very interested, and they would occasionally buy, and to date now, almost all independent Christian publishing houses have been bought out by a major player somewhere. There's still a few independent ones left, but they get bought out. And then even Waterbrook, which has and I wrote for, has a stellar reputation, they were started by a general market company, Bantam Doubleday Dell. Bantam Doubleday Dell was bought out, and then I think Random House ultimately has all of them and several others under their umbrella now. So that's one of the big things that has changed, and this is why an agent can be very important. A good agent will keep up with all of this. So we met Chip last week, and he's probably the most knowledgeable guy in publishing that I know. He's been a publisher, he's been an agent, he's been a writer. He represents several markets: general market, Christian market, just about everything. He's really in the know, and I depend on him to tell us, the authors, what in the world's going on with some of these things, and he does that. The other gorilla in the room is Amazon. Does that surprise you? I bring up Amazon.com.
I'm shocked.
No, not at all.
I'm shocked and repulsed. Why?
We're probably going to bring them back later and talk about them. They changed everything. Now, of course, there's a chain of events that brings this about. But Jeff Bezos, who was working in, I think he was a stockbroker, he was working in that kind of field, financial manager, something like that, decided he wanted to build this business where you could buy stuff on the internet. He thought the internet was going to be the next big thing. That's his first brilliant move. And he started this, I believe, out on this kitchen table. He began to take off. He moves to Seattle. And his boss tells him, when you're done with this little experiment, come back, I'll give you a real job. He hasn't had to go back yet. The guy's building spacecraft, for Pete's sake. He's got that kind of money now. Well, Amazon, and when we say that now, we're also talking about the internet in general, changed publishing in a remarkable way and faster than anyone else thought possible. The first thing it changed is how we buy books. Now, I'm sure you guys remember doing this. When you wanted a book, what did you do? You went to the local bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Almost all the local bookstores are gone. Most of them have gone belly up. Even Borders went belly up a few years ago, and that was just disastrous. Barnes and Noble is still around, and probably the only major player still around that has brick and mortar. Are you familiar with that phrase, a brick and mortar shop?
Yeah.
For those who may not be familiar with it, it means there's a physical place you go to. And they call it brick and mortar as opposed to a click store, where it's all done on the internet. And those brick and mortar places began to slowly disappear. And we buy most of our books now through Amazon or something like them. Barnes and Noble is another. Kobo, there's other places that provide these things, but the two biggies, iBooks, are going to be Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and iBooks. It's how most people buy their books, whether it's an ebook or a physical book. That's how they do it. That changed, and I've got to admit, I'm one of the ones that changed with that. I seldom go into a bookstore anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I can get the book almost as fast. I can get any book from just about anywhere and have it delivered to my door. And if it's an ebook, I can sometimes get them in 60 seconds or less. So we can talk about ebooks a little bit later. You were going to say something, Aaron?
Well, yeah, I liken some of the changes in publishing to what the changes that we saw in the music industry and the way technology has radically transformed the music industry. It doesn't even resemble what it was years ago, because you used to have CD shops. You would go into a mall, you'd have two different music stores, you'd have two different bookstores at least. Now you've got in your mall a Barnes and Noble, maybe, and I'm trying to remember the last time I saw a brick and mortar music store. They're novelties now, and when Napster first came out, and you know, peer-to-peer sharing, and Metallica suing Napster, and all the legal ramifications of downloading music and all these types of things. Well, the point was people wanted a more convenient, cheaper way to get the music that they wanted to listen to. And I think publishing has done something similar in the move to Amazon, or the reason Amazon has found a good working model is because they deliver that. They give you almost instantaneous gratification if you're getting an ebook. If you want to say the Kindle and the the Kindle and the Nook, Barnes and Noble Nook. If you want to say those are like the MP3 players of publishing, that's kind of what they are. And so now you've got a digital format that exists along with the print format, and several people still buy actual CDs and records, and they like the physical copy better than just the digital, and that's fine. So both markets might still exist, but I remember that for a long time, and you were publishing through this time, but when I first started looking to get published, 2009, 2010, publishing, just the industry itself just didn't know. It seemed to me that publishing didn't know where it wanted to go. There were all these mergers, like you say, houses buying out other houses. I had a book contract offer from one company, and they said they were going to send it the next week, and they didn't send it, and I said, what's going on? And they said, hold on, I'll get back to you. And 3 weeks later, they said, well, we don't publish fiction anymore. What do you mean you don't publish fiction anymore? We're not doing that. So there are lots of things like that where I think publishers, especially smaller publishers, were just trying to figure out a working model, a way they could stay afloat. I think now, and Pops, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we might be out on the other side of that tunnel now. I think people are starting to find models that work, and you've got your niche publishers, and you've got your big publishers, and you've got big publishers that have imprints that are niche publishers, and all of that. But would you say that publishing now has a better foundation and foothold, at least in terms of self-awareness and where they're going and what they want to do and how they're going to do it?
Yes, I would. And you're absolutely correct the way you lay this out. When these transitions came in, and remember, this is not that long ago. We'll talk more about ebooks in a little bit. But the first Kindle came out in 2007. And by 2009 it was just nuts. But the very first one came out around 2007. That's not that long ago. We've become so used to rapid change we don't pay attention to it anymore. Well, the way it hit the publishing business was amazing, especially when it came to ebooks. No one knew what to do with an ebook. The traditional publishers, the legacy publishers, how do you format an ebook? Who would want to buy an ebook when you could have a physical book? And many of them did not get a vision of what was going on until much later. They didn't know what to pay the authors, and the agents and the publishers were getting in bloody fistfights over this. They would say, "Well, we're just going to charge the same thing." So if you're in general markets, you're going to get 10% of the cover price, and if you're in if you're in another market like I'm in, you're going to get a percentage of the net, which is very small, and we'll just do it that way. And the agents are saying, well, why? If you're talking about ebooks, why would you do that? Because you don't have to, there's no storage, you don't have to pay people to manage a warehouse, all you have to do is format it, and that's it. And that changed over time. They had to figure that out. Well, they're pretty well settled on it now. But I've been around long enough now that every once in a while I'll get something from a publisher. They realize they did not do ebooks of mine, and now they have to send me another contract to sign to allow them to do ebooks because they don't have permission to do ebooks. So it got really chaotic there for a while, no one really knowing what to do. And then there were publishers who came along, and that's all they were going to do is ebooks. And then you mentioned the other thing, which is important to mention here, are the boutique publishers. You call them whatever you want, but they're small houses, mom and pop shops, most of them, that start very, very small. And some go on to do great things like the one you're with, which is really a small publishing house, but because technology has changed so much, they can run with the big boys. They can produce just as much quality. They can, since so much of it is electronic, pod printing, and remind me, we'll talk about in a second, POD printing, allows them to keep up with everyone else. So that changed, and now we see a bunch of small publishers coming along wanting to publish other people's books, and you have to be very careful as a writer in dealing with them because you can lose your shirt, and you have to read the contracts very closely because remember, they're out to make money. They're not out there to service you. As much as it sounds like they are, they're there to make money. Same thing with the big publishers, same thing. You're a supplier for them.
Right. I think again of my time in the band and some of the stuff that we're going through and some of the contracts that we looked at there that were just laughable. And there were plenty of record labels out there that would sign pretty much any band that was willing. And the idea, I think, Pops, you would call these a vanity press, but it's basically give us $5,000, we'll produce your CD for you. And and there are publishers out there who will do that. Give us $5,000 and we'll publish your book for you. And I keep thinking if I had $5,000, I would publish it myself now with Amazon. I wouldn't even need you. And the same thing with this. These record labels. I told them if I had $5,000, what are you giving me that I couldn't get myself for $5,000? You know, and there are some vanity presses, if you want to use that term. I don't know if that has a negative connotation. There are some that have bad reputations. There are some that have good reputations. That there's been several successful books that have come out of that model of publishing, in which again it's not all of them are bad, but you do have to be aware and you have to be cautious. And that was my role in the band. I wasn't a great musician, but I would read a contract and say this is not good for us to sign. That was my achievement. That was my contribution to the band, was don't sign here. You guys play the good music, and I say what we can and can't sign. So, but you know, I think there's a lot of parallels there, and it's something to be aware of. So vanity presses, I don't think those really existed 20 years ago, Pops. Have I missed that one? Were there?
Well,
I just didn't know about them.
Yeah, let's clarify a couple things. When we speak of a vanity press is a company that you, as a wannabe author, pay, and what they will do is take your manuscript, they will edit it, and I really need to put edit in quotes because some of them really don't do any editing at all. Some do. You know, you just have to do your homework. and you pay them to do all of that and to promote the stuff, and then you have to buy a bunch of your own books. And this is where all the stories come from, people with garages filled with boxes of their own books that they can't move, and then they do very little marketing. Maybe a website, maybe a catalog, and that's it. With that, that's a vanity press. But in this big shakeup where we have big companies buying out other companies and new ways of doing publishing, and really the technology, it's almost as revolutionary as Gutenberg press coming along, where anybody can typeset, anybody can do these things now. You have smaller businesses that are coming up that are the boutique type of publishers, and they're filling a niche, which means more and more books are being published. Now, some of those you may not get in advance. So normally when we talk about a traditional publisher and a traditional contract is you have a business somewhere that has a real office, has real editors, you sign a contract, you get in advance, and they work with you through the whole project. Now, some of these new ones that are coming in, Jeff Gerke for the longest time did one for science fiction and fantasy called March Your Lord Press. It's since sold to an agent named Steve Lobby, and they've changed the name. But he did an alternate agreement. You didn't get an advance. And in fact, you didn't get any money from the sales until his costs were paid for, but that was it. And the costs were minimal because he and his group did everything in-house. And then you started making money off of it. And that's a little different technique. You just don't get your money up front, but you get it consistently through based on sales, not based on an estimate of sales. And those are never right. So there's these new avenues, and so it's incumbent upon the writer now to be wise, be slow to make a decision, check out a few things, talk to people who've used the publishers, and see if it is a good fit, because a lot of them go belly up overnight, so they don't have enough of a track record. They may not be around.
How would a person investigate, research that type of information?
There's a couple of sites. I'm not an expert on these. One is Editors and Predators, and I think they keep track of predatory practices among some of the smaller publishers. That's one way. You can Google the name of the company and see if anybody's complained about them. If they say they've published a book, go to the key sellers such as Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and iBooks and see if that book is appearing anywhere. See if they're doing that. Take a close look at the contract, because if you're not careful, they will take the copyright. And if they take the copyright, you can't get it back until they decide to give it to you. Now that's true with traditional publishing. You grant them the right to continue to publish till they declare it out of print. And then they will revert the rights most of the time to you. If you don't, I've got a couple that I can't get back, apparently, so at least not now. But most will do that, so you have to be careful. And I know someone who signed a contract did not read it, very unwise thing to do, and not only did not get the copyright on it, they came very close to not putting her name on the cover.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Mixed into the contract was they had the rights to all her next books until they pass on them. And that's horrible, because they say, well, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to figure this out. Well, you're stuck. Your writing career's done. So you do have to be careful. But at the same time, there have been great opportunities come along. More of us can get published. Even with the small publishers, some of them, your publisher, Aaron, Lighthouse of the Carolinas, does an amazing job. With what they do, and it's quality work that's coming out of them. It's a very unique style of doing business. So there are some that are out there that are very, very good.
Yeah, I agree. I like Lighthouse's model, and they've really made the use of technology and use that to their advantage, and their contract reflects that. What I like about their contracts is I can read it and understand it. And they're really open and upfront with all that kind of stuff. So I've had really positive experiences with them. The advantage to me, or for me as a writer with them, is I'm not paying for the cover design. I'm not paying for my own editing. I don't get an advance, but on the back end I get a much better royalties, percentage of royalties than I would from any traditional publisher. And so, and again, the more marketing I do as a writer, the more sales I get, the more money I make. And so it puts a lot of onus on the writer. But I think that's something else that's changed in publishing over the last 20 years is how much marketing the publishers do on behalf of their writers. Is that correct, Pops?
Yeah, it is, and you know, I don't want to call down the roof on myself here, but I think it's the worst decision that's gone on in publishing, at least the publishers I'm working with now. This isn't true for every publisher. And that's why you have to kind of keep track of these things. But what has happened has been this shift where they expect the author to do the marketing and the promotion of the book. Mm-hmm. It used to be in traditional, and it still is in the traditional, or the legacy publishers as we call them sometimes, they have a marketing company, not a company, but a marketing department. And the smaller houses would hire marketing firms to do this. So I remember early on, a marketing company would be hired by the publisher, no money out of my pocket. They'd call me up, ask me questions, set me up on radio interviews and all the other things that go along with it. And they would do all that work. Well, what some publishers have done is they said, no, we think the author needs to do that. Well, this is ridiculous. This is like asking someone who has no plumbing skills to be your plumber. All right, you know, because I had this conversation with several publishers. I said, now let me see if I understand this. Don't you have a marketing guru at your? Yes, we get a couple of the best marketers around, and they went to school for that. Yep, they have degrees in it. Some of them have advanced degrees in the marketing. But you want me, who has absolutely no skill in that, no education in that, no experience in that, to do the job that they took 4 years to learn to do, and then you're going to hold me accountable for it. And that's what they do in publishing. They judge your worth based on your previous sales, even though you can't control the sales. So it's either luck, it hits it big, or you are really good at marketing. And a few authors have done that. They've really made it as marketers. But you're asking the untrained person to do the very needed work. You know, if I have to go in for surgery, when I go to the dentist, I want somebody who's been to school and has some experience. All right, I don't want somebody who was an auto mechanic last week and knows how to use a drill, you know, or a carpenter or something like that, and start working on my teeth. I want somebody who understands how to work the distribution, how to work the radio, television interviews, all that kind of stuff. And then they complain that the authors aren't doing the marketing, which they're not trained to do, and then it becomes very difficult. So that was one of the other problems. Adding to all of this, you know, the economic problems that happened in 2008, and the publishers were in trouble, and they were firing editors left and right. There was an old joke that in New York, you couldn't swing a cat. Sorry, Molly Jo. You couldn't swing a cat without hitting a fired editor. That's
really,
they were
you
just
couldn't
firing
say
everybody.
like a baseball bat or something, or a rope, or it had to be a cat.
Yeah, by cat, what I mean is a.
I know what you mean. It's just.
I meant a pillow.
Okay.
I'm just going to keep going and hope that you bought that.
This is retribution for earlier, right?
It's right.
That's how we roll around here.
So that's, but that was one of the problems. Since they cut back so much, they try to put more of it on the authors, and they're just asking untrained people. You want authors who are trained to write, not authors who are trained to market. If you can get both, great. So that's been one of the changes, and along with that comes this horrible term called platform. You heard it from my agent last week. It's this thing called platform. And that means we're looking for an author who not only can write, but writes well, can write multiple books, so we can sign them to multiple books, and they can market, and they already have a built-in platform. They're famous. That's what we want. And that's one of the big changes that's happened, and it's been bad for publishing.
Again, I go back to the music industry, and we had, I don't want to name drop, but we had a pretty major label that was interested in us. They heard one of our shows down in LA. Pops, I think I shared this story with you. And we had some talks with them, and one of the first questions they asked was, how many fans do you have? 6? I don't know. Like, we come from the desert. What do you want? Like, And so I think their comment was, when you have 10,000 fans, give us a call. And I said, again, if I had 10,000 fans, why would I need you? So you want me to do all the work so that you can take the money that I've earned? Okay, well that seems fair. And it's not necessarily like that, but publishing is low risk, and I think that's something that has not changed over the last 20 years. That's one of the consistent things, is that publishing is low risk. They want to make sure that whomever they sign and whatever they sign is going to at least recoup the money that they're going to put into it. Because publishers do put in time and effort and money into a project, and it's appropriate for them to expect some sort of repayment, and that they're going to make some money on it. I think it's wrong for them to expect to make profit if they're not working at it. If they're just having the writer do all the marketing, then that's problematic, I think. But it is what it is. I don't know, Pops. What are your thoughts on that, the low-risk publishing?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by low risk. Low risk to whom?
Well, they want to minimize their risk. So, for example, every book is a risk to the publisher, in the sense that they're going to invest $10,000, $15,000, whatever it is, to get this book ready to go. The printing, the binding, the distribution, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. The publisher wants to make sure they're going to make that money back from the title, right?
Yeah, and they need to do that. And that's just good business. There's no complaint on my part about publishers doing that, because they take most of the risk. No one knows whether or not a book is going to sell. If they did, then every book they bought would be a bestseller. No one knows. Mm-hmm. They don't. It's throwing spaghetti against the wall. And I've used this illustration before, but there's an old saying that when you walk by a publisher, you look at their building and you think you see a business, but what you're really seeing is a casino, because it's all gambling. No one really knows. Right. So they take the risk, and that's one reason they take the lion's share of the profit. And I don't complain about that too much. With that, they take the risk. They assume a lot of legal liability. They're the ones that provide the lawyers. They're going to do the editing, cover work, the interior architecture, design of the book. So they have a tough job being able to pick the right book that's going to make their money back on that. And that's why it's difficult for them to figure out at times how big an advance to give, because they're going to upfront that money. So if you, depending on what level you're writing at, normally now I just get a Starbucks card, but if they're going to give you a monetary advance, it's 10,000, it's 20,000. I've seen them in the seven figures, not on any contract that I've signed, but I know people that have gotten seven-figure deals like that, but most of them are going to be fairly low, and the reason is they want to recoup that as soon as possible. So you don't get any more royalties until that advance is paid off. So there's always been the argument among writers, is low royalty so that you get a steady stream of royalties later better than as much royalty up front as possible. And people have different opinions about that. My opinion, you get as much as you can up front.
I have a question. If you do get an upfront advance, let's say $10,000, and your book sells only $5,000, do you have to pay them back that other $5,000 in royalty after? Like, is it in a contract, or is that just luck of the draw?
No, you don't. Not in traditional publishing. That's why you have to look at some of these other types of publishers closely. They never sign a contract that says that. This is their gamble. You gambled your time. You gambled your effort. You gambled on them being able to sell books. They're gambling that your book will sell. You're gambling that they'll be able to sell it. So no, you don't have to pay it back. And it doesn't take them as long to pay back their expenses as most people think, because they get most of the royalties that come off of. They get most of the the profit that comes off of a book, and they get to keep that. Well, they've advanced a lot of it, so can't complain too much about that. They do that, and the purpose of the advance is so you can continue to write as an author. So you're not being distracted by everything. So that's the purpose of an advance.
Nice.
Indeed. All right. So What does all of this mean for our listeners who are perhaps not published yet? They're looking for publication. They are getting their manuscripts polished up. They're putting together their proposals. They're starting to query agents, perhaps. What do you think are some important things for them to keep in mind throughout this process of trying to wade into this publishing industry?
I think for most authors, the best thing to do is if you can get a good agent. A good agent is a knowledgeable agent, one who speaks frankly to you, that will support you, and that will do battle should a battle come up with a publisher. Now, those don't happen a lot, but you need an agent that's got some kind of backbone. And I've seen agents who will ask the author to make the phone call. I know you're having a problem, so once you give them a call, that's not your job as the author. That's why you have an agent. So I haven't had that need much. Chip did have to get out his billy club a couple of times with one publisher. The publisher demanded something, and he just simply wrote back, because I got a little notice. I thought it was a great thing he wrote. He goes, "Nobody does that. You know it. Only one publisher does that, and you know what everybody thinks about them. It ain't going to happen." That was the end of it. I thought, whoa. Because it's a risk for the agent, too, because if that publisher says, okay, I'm not taking anything you try to sell us, then it becomes a problem for the publisher because the agents all talk, so people just agents will stop representing people to them. So get a good agent if you can to do that. Now, I know that's sometimes more difficult than getting a publisher, but at some point you want to get a good agent. It keeps up with all of this kind of stuff because it's hard to keep track of. It's no longer enough to be just an author and let others worry about the details. You've got to worry about the details. Al's axiom number 62 is you have to manage your agent. The agent's supposed to manage your career, but you have to manage your agent because they're just people. They get distracted, so sometimes you have to stay on them. But you do keep an eye on the agent. A good agent, you don't have to do that much, but you do need to do your part in it. Competition for the publisher's eyes and ears is more important than ever before. There's just a lot of noise out there, so you have to be the best you can possibly be. Write the best. Give a lot of thought to what you're doing and your proposals. You got to think all that stuff through from the perspective of the publisher, the acquisitions editor who's going to be looking at it. Make it easy for them. They will love you, and it'll move you a long ways along. And then today's writer must be creative not only in story creation, which is what we love to do, but in business, which is often the thing we don't like to do. But nonetheless, it requires we have open eyes and open minds. And then just know that everything changes. This is not unusual. As someone once said, the only constant thing in life is change. Because it just happens in everything. It's not unusual. We just happen to have lived through the most recent cataclysmic kind of change.
Absolutely. Man, I thought I had a really good question. We're kind of getting close here on time, so I'll ask one more. And there are several other questions that I've got here scripted on our show notes that we didn't quite get to. So those of you listening to the audio only, make sure you check out the show notes. And obviously, if you're looking at the show notes, maybe you should watch the YouTube video as well, or download the audio cast so you can get kind of both sides of what we're talking about here. But I think we would be a little remiss if we didn't talk about self-publishing. If I am a writer who has not been published yet, is self-publishing something I should look at immediately? Is this a first line of defense thing, or is this a last line of defense? At what point do you say I'm going to go it alone rather than trying to secure a more traditional or mainstream publisher?
Self-publishing should always be considered, and this was the other tsunami that hit, and it came from Amazon. Now, Amazon created the Kindle. The Kindle is not the first ebook reader, but this ebook reader changed everything for authors. So let me address that first, and then I'm going to jump into the self-publishing very quickly. Back in 2007, the first Kindle came out, and it is remarkable. Let's see, here it is. It's not the first Kindle, it's the first edition of the Kindle.
Wow.
It is spiff-ola. I'm still impressed with it. It's amazing what you could do. But what Jeff Bezos did, what Amazon did that Sony did not do, and some of the others, is they made it easy. With Sony and some of the others back then, what you had to do was you had to go online, find your book, download the book to your computer, connect your ebook reader to your computer, transfer it from your computer to your ebook reader, then you were good to go. What Amazon did was said, here, look at these books, pick which one you like, and we will send it to you in 60 seconds or less. So to test this, I was driving with my good friend Jim, and we were headed up the 15 highway in Southern California, and I had this thing with me at that time, and still does use WhisperNet, which is a cellular system. I found a book I wanted. I bought the ebook at while we were traveling 75 miles an hour, and in 60 seconds I had a book to read. And at that point I knew everything changed. Everything changed. So the Kindle comes out in 2007, $400. I mean, how many books do you have to buy to make that worthwhile? Yet people did, and it has not ended since. It is one of the most amazing things. Now, what this does for writers is it gives us another avenue of a creative outlet. We can self-publish, and self-publishing used to have a bad connotation because it's associated with vanity press, and there's some people putting out real garbage. But here's what I've learned. Established writers, I'm talking about people with 25, 30 books in print, I'm talking about bestsellers, often will choose self-publishing because, one, it's faster. Publishing moves at glacial speeds to traditional publishing. It's like 2 years' time from the time you sign your contract to your book comes out. It can be as long as 2 years. It's less for smaller houses. I just lost my train of thought there. Is anybody listening to me?
You were saying that
the speed of publishing.
Yeah, the speed of publishing. So they choose to self-publish because of that, because they get to keep more money. They make more profit off the book, quite a bit more profit off the book that they make. And since they're already known for their writing, it's easier for them to sell the books. So if that works out, they can write things that no publisher will pick up. So let's use The Harbingers that we've talked about here a few times. That series of novellas that I'm doing with 3 other authors. Let's start with Bill Myers, Angie Hunt, Frank Peretti, international bestseller, and then they brought me on as a token little guy. And we're doing that. Well, we self-publish. Why? Because there's not a publisher around that would take novellas like that. Yet we felt, really Bill felt, and then we agreed with him that these would sell if we could get them in the hands of the people. They'd be quick reads, address a short attention span. It'd be like watching a serial on television. And so it made more sense for us to self-publish, and we make more money off that by self-publishing than we ever could have gone to with traditional publishing. And the irony of it all, every 4 books gets bound into another book later, so you can get each cycle, they're called cycles, as a single book, and there's a traditional publisher that may be buying those from us. So it may end up going traditional after all. I'm not sure how that's going to work out because I'm not involved in setting that up, but I got word that it passed the first few stages of acceptance, and I guess now it's up to the people on the top floor to make decisions about that.
Nice.
So all of that has changed. Self-publishing, again, allows you to publish what you want. Also, it's better for people who do a lot of public speaking because you make your money in public speaking, not on the fees, but on what's called back table. So if you self-publish your book, you make much more money off each sale at the back than you do if someone else publishes it and you have to buy it to be able to sell it in the back. So it makes more sense if you're doing public speaking. So especially with nonfiction, sometimes it makes more sense to do that. So, it's kind of hit and miss. You become the publisher when you self-publish. So everything the publisher would do, you're going to have to be responsible for. You can't blame the publisher for typos. I've long depended on my ability to complain about the editing. When I do this, then the truth comes out, and it's me that has the problem. So that cover, now you can hire people to do cover and all these other things, but then you're upfronting the money too, just like a regular publisher does. So there's a little give and take on that. Does that help at all, or?
Yes,
absolutely.
Very much.
So.
Also remember, you can still do physical books. Yeah. When I do my books, When I self-publish, I'm self-publishing all my old books. I also do a physical book. I don't sell a lot of physical books because most people want ebooks. Now, but nonetheless, you can do that and not have to buy a garage full of books to get copies because of pod printing. Remember I said we're going to come back to that? POD is print on demand. That's one of the technologies that has changed everything. So if you go to CreateSpace where I publish, or if you go to Amazon and buy the physical book there, or through Barnes & Noble or iBooks, whatever it might be that you go through, it all goes through CreateSpace. They print the book and send it. So you can get a physical book out also. And then the other real advantage of self-publishing this way, especially electronic, you can change things in a matter of minutes. Somebody calls up and says, yeah, you really don't want to, you misspelled shirt, and it spelled something else you don't want in there. You can say, well, let me just fix that. You correct it, you upload it again, and the next person that buys it is good to go. So the time thing has all changed.
None the wiser.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've got a lot of other questions to get to, but sadly out of time. So, Molly Jo, I do want to get to the questions in the room, though. I think there were a couple there that we had.
There's two questions. Bruce Brady's in the room. He wants to know, along this topic, what do you see as the future of self-publishing?
Bruce, buddy, what do I see as the future?
Yes.
I think it's going to go along the same path. I think we'll see a little more sophisticated reading devices, but you don't really need devices anymore. That was the other quick change. And let me praise Jeff Bezos again. I know a lot of people don't like him because they blame him for the passing of the small bookstores. I don't know if that's fair, but I understand the sentiment. But one of the things he did was he did not require that everybody buy a Kindle. Once the app thing, and this is what Apple changed for everyone with the iPad and the iPhone, was the purchasing of apps for very little money. Well, what Amazon did and Barnes & Noble did and others did is you buy an app and you can read any book from any of these places on whatever device you have. So when I read an ebook, I can read it on one of two iPads, or my computer, or my phone, and it will always pick up where I left off on the last device, and it's free. So that's been a big change. So where's that going to go? I think we're going to see more and more of that. I think what we may see is a continued surge in self-publishing by professional writers, which might make it a little tougher for those trying to break in. But I think we're going to see more and more. Again, I know a lot of writers who have been in traditional markets, and this is their choice. They have given up on traditional publishing for any number of reasons. So I think we'll see more and more of that. And with that, that doesn't mean that a traditional publisher can't pick you up. The book The Martian was self-published, which went on to become the movie. And he was publishing that, as Cory Doctorow used to do, about a chapter a week on a website, and then boom, it was picked up, I think, by Crown, and then it just went crazy from there. Again, no one knows, but he did a superior job with that. So I think the future is going to be more electronic. I still think we haven't seen much of this, but I think we'll see more multimedia in books. When e-publishing first came out, there was a book on Nixon, and as you would read along, you'd come across a video, and you could play the video. Oh. Him saying, "I'm not a crook," or you would see a news report, or you would see a riot over Vietnam, and all these multimedia embedded right in the book. So I think we'll probably see more and more of that as time goes on, if that's what readership wants.
That's great. And I think there was one more, right, Molly?
Yes. Maya says, first she says, thanks for the topic. She needs this. She says, since publishers want authors who can write multiple books, when querying an agent, if you have 2 completed manuscripts, should you mention that in the query letter?
Absolutely. What a publisher wants is to know that they're entering into an agreement with someone who's easy to work with, but also who has enough talent to do more than one book. They're not looking for one-book wonders unless that book just does a bajillion in sales. That usually doesn't happen. But yeah, do that. I always suggested multiple books. I had one primary book that I'd push, and then I always listed other books, so they would know that I'm creative and I have lots of stories. And then the publishers usually wanted to do 2 or 3 books, and that's what they would sign the contract for. And one of the reasons they do that, it's a little selfish, but it makes business sense, so I'm not complaining about it. But one of the reasons they would do that is, since you're a new writer, they're signing you at a smaller advance.
Mm-hmm.
So you write book 1, and they give you 10 grand as an advance, and you write book 2, and they're going to give you 10 grand for that, so you're going to get 20 grand for up front for the 2 books, and your first book is Tom Clancy's The Hunt for Red October. Boom, it's gone. You know, President Reagan is promoting your book for you with that. So now you're going to want a bigger advance on the second book. Well, you sign the contract saying that this, and you've already accepted the advance for the second book. Well, that makes sense. They get a little more. You still get the money because you're a famous writer, but that's one reason they want to do that. So to make sure that you have more than one idea, and to make sure that you don't suddenly become too expensive for them.
Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of our podcast at almost 1 hour exactly, so that's nice timing. And so any last comments, questions, or concerns, Molly or Pops?
Nope, nothing in the chat room. Everything is going good.
I've talked enough. My only complaint is I'm now surrounded by all this hot air.
Oh, yes. Well, we do thank you all for listening. Next week we're going to be talking about contracts, so you want to make sure that you tune in for that. And again, hit that like button if you don't mind at the bottom there of our YouTube. Tell your friends about us if you don't mind. If you are looking for show notes, you can find that at aarongansky.com. You can find Pops at altongansky.com. And you can find Molly at frankly, my dear mojo.com. So until next week, thanks for listening and good writing.